There we go. We are live. Hello and welcome to TechNow, the web series for ServiceNow administrators and developers. My name is Chuck Tomasi from ServiceNow. I am also joined here today by...
I'm Dave Slusher, developer advocate with ServiceNow.
I'm Pradeep Sharma, working as senior application developer with store business unit at ServiceNow.
And I'm Craig Stepp, a senior curriculum developer at ServiceNow, as long as I can say it.
We have a hot topic today, and Pradeep and Dave are in for a whirlwind tour on this one. We've done some of this topic before on Live Coding Happy Hour. Turned out to be one of the fastest growing, most watched stuff. Everybody's very excited about this. I won't spoil it for you. Dave can do the intro of what we're up to. Before we get started, let's roll the deck. Our smiling faces are pretty much done here.
Let us get directly into this as quickly as I can get this part going. All right. And you guys let me know if you see the deck.
I see the deck.
All right. Fantastic. So as we said, this is episode 44. We're talking about Flow Designer and IntegrationHub, which are kind of the almost like the 800-pound gorilla type features of Kingston. They're the ones that sort of make conversation about the other ones difficult because they're so big. And so our next show, essentially with us, kind of why we divided these Kingston shows basically into two shows, which is this and then everything that's not this. Because it's kind of difficult to talk about this and anything else at the same time because it's so, it's so, I don't know what you call it. It's like the viral version of a feature, right? It's hard. It's very exciting and very cool stuff. So, before we go any further, let us get into our longer introductions. As we said, I'm Dave Slusher. I am a developer advocate, although I have not changed my bio slide in the platform business unit.
Slide deck, Dave.
Oh, where did it go? Oh, let's get back to this. Is this...
Much as we like seeing your smiling, shiny face.
I know, right?
You're going to cut from... It'd be funny if I was wearing the identical shirt.
Wish I could just pinch your cheeks right there.
I'm wearing the identical
I think a stray keystroke got rid of my share. Are we back?
All right.
Developer evangelist, developer advocates with the platform business unit. We just had my 4-year anniversary with ServiceNow, but I've been at this, I guess if you count grad school, getting close to 25 years. ServiceNow since 2013, and I've been co-host of TechNow since 2016. I've spent an inordinate amount of time over the Thanksgiving holiday working with my comic book collection program.
Program?
Yes, I'm switching platforms for my comic book database. All right.
That's another show.
Next up is Pradeep.
Hi, I'm Pradeep. I've been with ServiceNow for 5 years. My current job is to team up with the architect and guide the partners with app development and certifications. On the other side, you'll see me a lot hanging on the community, helping our customers and partners.
All right. And Craig?
Yes, I'm a senior curriculum developer. I got it right that time. I support our cloud infrastructure for ed services, and I really specialize in cloud automation, and I've done a lot of orchestration, just a little bit of discovery, stuff like that in there when I was in the PS organization here at ServiceNow. And I've been a co-host of TechNow since 2016 to present. I like podcasting, photography, Linux, and I'm trying to get back into my photography. I've let it languish, so
walks on the beach.
Yeah, walks on the beach. And
all right.
Happy thoughts. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Chuck. I'm the guy who started all this nonsense. I've been at this for about 35 years. That makes me feel old, which I think I am now, but I may not always act it. I've been a customer for a couple of years. Joined ServiceNow in 2010. Been doing mainly custom applications and integrations along the way. I'll leave the rest of the story for another time. We can have a good old chinwag, as they say in the UK, at Knowledge.
Speaking of which, Knowledge, May 7th to May 10th this year. Back to Las Vegas, Nevada. Nothing against our Floridian friends, but boy, I like to get to Vegas every year. So, and we are at the Venetian. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And it Saturday or Sunday, over the weekend, I believe the call for speakers closed. I'm pretty sure that there was a very large rush there at the end. Good.
Imagine that.
Yes. So if you did not already put in your proposal for a talk, then I'm afraid that deadline has closed. But now begins the fun part, which is the content creation season. So we got about 6 months of that. For some of us, there's going to be a lot of that work.
I was going to say, speaking of the last minute, no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. All right. So with that, let us first get on to our community quick tip. And so Chuck is going to talk about this. I'm going to bring, if you want to introduce the subject, I will stop the PowerPoint and get the.
So what I've seen in the community a few times is people doing a glide record query for one single record. They'll set it up, they'll pass a sysid, and they'll say, well, let's run a while loop. And if you give a sysid, that's sort of the unique identifier for the record. There's really no need to do a while loop. And even if you trim that down to an if, there's a way to consolidate that to even a tighter piece of code without losing any of the readability. So what I often see is something that Dave's got on the screen right here, where we'll look for an incident by sysid. And there's nothing wrong with this. It's perfectly valid. You're setting up a gr.add query and passing it the sysid. And this one always scratch my head on this, because I say, well, we're getting one record. First of all, a while loop looks a little funny to me. And second of all, there's two statements in there that I just don't need. The add query and the query. I can do this all with an if using the get method, because by default, the get method defaults to the sysid. So if I say if gr.get of some sysid, that's exactly the same. It will enter that block of code if I've got that sysid, if I get that record corresponding to that sysid, I should say. And if it doesn't, I can always set up an else and print an error message, whatever it is, record not found, that kind of thing. You do your own dirty debugging yourself.
Could be an initializer record.
It could be initializer record. Maybe if I can't get the record, it doesn't exist, so I will create the record. You're right, insert a record rather than update a record. There's another good use case for this. Perfect. And get actually can take two parameters. The default for the first one is the sysid. Mm-hmm. The second one is any field name. So if I feel like I've got uniqueness in here, maybe it's a correlation ID. Is that the right word? Is that what I said before? The task record has a field called correlation ID, which is typically used for integrations. Let's say I'm getting a record or updating a record to Salesforce, and I want to keep these in sync. That would be their version of the sysid. I can then say, get the correlation ID that goes with this number, and it should be a unique record identifier on my system and their system, and use any field I want in there. So it's just a way to sort of tighten this up. But again, you don't lose any readability, at least in my opinion, to say, if I can get this record by finding the number that correlates to this number, assuming your numbers are unique. Sometimes they're not. If people reset their number sequence, this may be an issue, but you get the idea. You can look it up by other unique values as well. So that's my quick tip of the day, how to shorten up that glide record query and still maintain readability.
Well, you know, one of the like constant drums I beat in pretty much every format we ever talk about this is about the readability and kind of the like expressing the intent of the code in the code itself. And so we talk about how I don't really care if it's necessarily the most runtime optimized code. This is one of those rare cases where making the code shorter actually makes the intent more clear. That it's slightly obfuscated. When you look at this, it's not 100% clear that you're looking for a single thing, which is basically is going to be present or is not. Because as you said, Chuck, this is while looping on something that, because of the nature of it, will have either 0 or 1 values. And so you're actually presenting the shorter, more concise version is actually more clear as to intent. This almost never happens in the world of computer science.
I know, right?
Taking away code makes it more, you know, I grew up in Perl where, you know, the crazy one-liners where you would try to obfuscate the intent of it. And in this case, shorter is better. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. On with the show.
On with the show. All right. And so if I can get back and forth from PowerPoint, which is always my challenge. All right. So let's talk about Flow Designer and IntegrationHub. And so we're going to be, when we originally did this, it was a little slide heavy. So we're going to I'm trying to shake up the order to get to the power of it even faster. So we're gonna get to the demo much sooner than we did in our first take at this. So Flow Designer is one of the really standout features of the Kingston release. It is intended to allow you to easily automate common tasks. So there will be in Kingston, once you get your hands on a Kingston baseline instance, if you don't have it already, if you upgrade your developer instance, you can do that now. You will have the ability to set up flows in the Flow Designer. And when you do that, there will be some pre-built actions and triggers in that instance. And you'll be able to do the building of logic with natural language drag and drop interface, which is an extremely familiar paradigm. Probably most of the people in our demographic, if you're spending your Monday afternoon watching this or you're looking at it afterwards, you're probably familiar with one of Tasker or Zapier or the big hitter in the space, the IFTTT. So it's not a kind of thing that's going to be unfamiliar to anybody in this space. And so let us, if I can pop back over to it, did that work? If you pop over to it, this is in fact what that interface looks like. Now, Pradeep is going to give you the actual demo. This is not a demo so much as kind of a sneak preview. You see that this is much less nerdy, much less propeller-headed, Linux geek way to build logic. This is very simple. It's very clear what's happening, right? You have a trigger, you have a set of actions, and it's very obvious what's happening, right? This is a Slack thing because it has the Slack logo. This is a ServiceNow thing because it has the ServiceNow logo. So it's very readable, and it is less of a burden to entry to non-technical people, to non-traditional developers, et cetera, et cetera. So
that's one thing that I like, and I just want to stick this in there, is you're enabling a lot more people in your organization, which inevitably offloads some of the work from IT to say, you know what, you're the process owner, you understand this thing, why don't you go build a Flow Designer for it? You don't need to be, like Dave said, a propeller head to write these things. I'm not sure I would turn non-technical people loose on the standard workflow as it is today, but Flow Designer is a much easier point of entry for that.
Yes, absolutely. Which is, and these are all very, very explicit kind of design considerations in the creation of it. So I'm going to give you really a quick overview of this, and then we're going to get to the demo with Pradeep, and I will kind of narrate some of this as we go with that. So a flow has properties, it has a trigger, it has actions and data. And so you kind of could see on the screen, you can see the triggers and the action. Properties are really kind of the metadata about it, like your name and scope, etc. And data is kind of the information that's getting passed around inside it. Think of like the context that would be inside a current workflow. Think about kind of the data that might happen from one activity to another, or in the automated testing, think about kind of the data that passes in the form of pill from one thing to another. You have exactly the analogous way of dealing with that in a flow.
I guess you could say payload is probably another good word for it.
Yeah. I mean, so payload I think of as kind of like the external lump that's going out, like the external, everything that's going out. But we're also talking about not only that, but like the information that's moving around internally from like action to action.
Okay.
And so we can kind of skip that. I already showed you that. We have the concept of a spoke. And a spoke is really kind of the bundling mechanism. So as you, in that quick example I showed you, we have the ServiceNow platform spoke, which was a couple of, our trigger was that a record changed and we were changing some records, updating records. We also had a different spoke, which was the Slack spoke. And so spokes are really scoped applications that can contain flow templates, the actions or action steps. They're really a way of kind of bundling together semantically similar chunks of work, typically that are around the same, if they're an integration, they're basically things that integrate to the same thing or do the same kinds of work.
I would make them sort of analogous to an activity pack in orchestration, if you're familiar with those.
Yeah, very much like that. And so the example spokes that come with the baseline instance, in the platform, you've got some ITSM spokes, where you can have some pre-formatted, say, incidents and problems and changes and things like that. You have some atomic units that will work with Visual Task Board, that will work with customer service and field service, etc. And then in IntegrationHub, you've got HipChat, Slack, Microsoft Teams, kind of built out. And the last thing before I turn it over to Pradeep for the demo, let's talk a little bit about what IntegrationHub is. So Flow Designer is basically that user interface that I showed you. It's this way of building logic. If you're doing logic that is like strictly on platform stuff, so you're doing the, any of these platform spoke stuff where you're only interacting with your own instance, you're rewriting records, you're triggering off a record and then updating another different record on your same instance, that's Flow Designer. At the point where the flow of logic leaves your instance and hits an external system, whether it's another instance, whether it's an integration point out anywhere in the cloud, then at that point that's IntegrationHub. And so that's kind of the how those two products relate. So it is important to kind of keep that clear, is that the other thing is that Flow Designer requires no licensing. IntegrationHub is a licensed product, and that requires a high ticket to turn it on, and it requires licensing to use. So IntegrationHub is kind of what should call it? It's almost like the souped up version of the amount of logic. It's kind of like also analogous to orchestration. It's the point at which you're leaving the instance. So with that, I'm going to turn this over. I'm going to stop my share, and we're going to turn it over to Pradeep, who is going to walk us through kind of creating a flow from the ground up.
All right, so I'll go ahead and share my screen.
Yeah, I'm hoping that the lower third will go away at the appropriate time. Yeah, okay, it did.
So guys, please let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, I see it.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So before we go ahead,
before you go ahead, could you make the font just a little larger?
Sure.
We're already playing with a squished screen on YouTube.
Okay, so does it look better now?
One more. There we go.
Okay, so before we go ahead with the Flow Designer creation, I'll create a scoped application so that we can capture all the changes in our own scope. So let me go ahead and create the scoped app. Oops.
Yeah, and it's worth noting, and we're going to see this, once we first start getting in there. So, the spoke, as I mentioned, spoke basically it has a one-to-one correlation with scoping, right? Anything that where you see a spoke containing chunks of the Flow Designer UI and the logic, that implies that there's a scope that's bundling those things together. So, whether it's for internal, your internal use or something that you're providing to somebody else, there is going to be a scope associated with it.
Okay, so for some reason, okay, let me go ahead and try now.
You got to get a unique scope on the store.
This is
Okay, so I'll give some random name. Oops. Let me check if I have. I'll try it one more time.
The hazard of doing demos multiple times.
yeah.
Okay, all right.
There we go. All right.
Success.
Counting numbers. This is demo 24.
It's the problem that only we have. Like nobody out in the world that doesn't do this has this problem.
Okay, all right. So we are in the scoped app right now. So the reason I'm creating the scoped application is because I want to capture all the flow creation in my own scope. So I'll filter it down to Flow Designer, and I'll click on the Designer module. So you'll see this is a new landing page for the flow. And on this tab, I can see the flows and actions that are shipped out of box and the custom ones that are created by you. So probably I can click on any of the flow, and you'll notice that it opens in the new tab next to the home button. From here, you can go through the existing flow, or you can make the modification on this page. For now, I'll just close it. I'll move to the action tab. And from the action tab, you can view all the existing actions. And this is what the day was referring to the spoke. So if I can just do the show matching. So this is, for an example, is an ITSM spoke, which is on scoped applications, and it bundles the related actions together. And the next section is flow execution. So on this flow execution, you will see a record created each time your flow gets executed. So basically this gives an history each time your flow executed, and you'll see the values like state and runtime. And the next section is help, which gives a quick link to your flow designer documentation. So I can create the new flow or action by selecting one of these choices. I'll go ahead and create the new flow, and you'll see a new pop-up. From here, let's call this as flow designer demo. And you'll notice that we are in the application demo now because we are in our own scope. The next field is protection. By default, it is none. It has two values, none or read only. If it is read only, which means then on your target instance, if you ship it, it would not be editable. For now, I'll leave it to none, and I'll give it a description.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that having that scope picker on there is actually is one of the things I really like about like all the little fit and finish around the Flow Designer. As somebody who has accidentally created things in the wrong scope many times, being able to adjust the scope you're at as you're doing the flow is quite nice.
Yeah, that's a good point, Dave. So basically, I want to highlight it again. So you can edit your properties at any point of time, and you'll notice that there are any fields are like editable except the application scope. So just make sure that you are in the right scope before you proceed with the flow designer creation. Okay, all right. So we notice that we are in our flow designer interface, and the status is currently in the draft. I'll go ahead and create the trigger. So basically, trigger determines at what point of time your flow will execute. Trigger are of two types, record or schedule. In records, you'll see the options like created, or updated, deleted. Basically, it's an CRUD operation. And in the schedule, you'll see the options like daily, weekly, monthly, and so on. So for now, I'll select the option like created or updated. And I'll filter it down to incident. So what we're gonna do in right now in the demo is we'll create a flow against the incident table, and we're gonna demonstrate you with the out-of-box actions like send email, wait for condition, and then we'll post a message to the Slack channel, and we'll see how we can pass this incident to an external system. So this is kind of the demonstration or the objective that I'm going to do as of today.
And Pradeep, let me just point out one thing that I've done multiple times incorrectly is that run trigger once, particularly like when you're in the experimentation phase. I have caused myself a lot of distress by leaving that in once, which means it's going to trigger off any given record one time. And like for trying to figure out why this is not running. I said created or updated, and I keep updating it. Why is it not triggering? That is almost always the case. So
yeah,
now
there's valid use cases for running it once. Don't get us wrong, but
but early in your exploration, particularly when you're like fiddling with it and trying to see it run, you're probably going to want that in always.
Yeah, I think I can think of one of the use case, like if you have the approvals, I think that is the only time you would want to have the run trigger as once. Okay, so for now, I'll leave it to always and click on done. So next step is to create an action. So action is the actual place where your execution takes place. So if I click on actions, you will notice ServiceNow core actions, and there are few application specific actions like ITSM. In the ServiceNow core actions, you will see the actions like create record, update, or delete record. And you'll also notice that each time I hover across the action, there is an inline documentation which gives more information about each actions. And then there are like few other actions like Slack, ITSM, Slack or HIP chat, which are basically communicates with an external system. So for these actions, you need an ServiceNow IntegrationHub plugin. So if you're on your developer instance, you would not see these actions by default unless you have activated it via self-service view. And if you're a customer, I think you need to raise the request with ServiceNow customer support. So as and when you have the IntegrationHub plugin, you will get the default action like Slack, e-bonding, Microsoft Team, and HipChat. And then there is another button called Flow Logic. So these are basically used for unconditional or repeated actions. So by default, we have like if or for each loop. So I'll go ahead and create, I'll select one of the action called send email, and which is available in ServiceNow core action. Okay, so now I can pass in the static or dynamic value in this action. To pass in the dynamic value, there are two ways. Either I can do it via data pill picker. So the small ball icon, what you see here, is called the data pill picker. Or I can drag and drop the values from the data bus. So on the right hand side, you see this section. This is called the data bus. Basically, it stores all the data that is available to your flow. For now, you'll notice that it's on the incident table because we have the trigger defined against our incident table. So I'll expand the incident record, and you'll notice that all the columns are available with its type. In the flow terminology, these are called the pill. So basically, all these are called the pill names, and each of the pills have its own type defined next to it. So I'll go ahead and drop the caller because I want to fire an email to the caller of an incident. And then I'll give the subject. So
And
let's
go ahead.
Yes, sorry, Dan. So let's pass it the dynamic number. So this time we'll see how we can do it via data pill picker. So I'll click on this, and you'll notice we have the incident trigger. From here, I can expand the incident record, and I can search for number. Okay, so this way we can pass the dynamic number. So there are two ways. Either I can pass it via data pill picker, or else I can drag and drop via from the data bus.
Yeah, and for those of you who have used the automated testing framework, these are kind of familiar looking UI elements and a familiar feel. It's basically the same UI element working the same way, right? It's the context of anything that came before that is returning a value, including your trigger, and then anything that's any data that's being exposed by any of the steps along the way are then available to everything subsequent to this.
Yeah. So the next action is the idea. We'll try to create an incident task, and you'll notice that it is available by default in ITSM. And one of the cool features is that you can search your action from this search tab pretty much, and it is super helpful that you need not drill into each of the application to find those actions. So I'll select the create incident task on incident. So what does this action does is it would create an incident task record, and it will copy short description values from the parent record. And as soon as I have this action, I can pass in the incident value. So to either I can have the static or dynamic, but for now I'm going to pass it the dynamic record, and I can drag and drop on this data pill picker. And you'll also notice there are a few other icons on these actions. For example, like the annotation. This is helpful if you want to add some extra color commentary. I can have like some text over here. And then there are like few other actions. I can move my action up and down, and I can add the annotation. I can delete my action, or if I want to open any action, I can click on this, and what it will do is it will open in a new tab. We'll get into more details when we talk about the action. The next, we'll go ahead and create one more action, and we'll select wait for condition. I'll drag and drop the incident record, and you'll notice it populates the incident table. I'm gonna select the condition as state is resolved. So what is this action gonna do is it will wait until this incident state is resolved. Once it is resolved, then it will pass to the further action. So now I'm gonna go ahead and select the new other action, and this time we'll take the Slack, which is an action you get once you activate the IntegrationHub plugin. And I'll select the post incident details. So this action, what it will do is by default, it will take all the incident details and it will post in your Slack channel. So to make it working, all we need is the webhook URL. Let me go ahead and get the webhook URL from the Slack channel.
Yeah, and it's worth noting. So earlier this year, when the announcement was made that Slack was integrating with ServiceNow, this is in fact this is what that announcement was about. So the integration with Slack is not something it was always possible, right? Because there is a webhook exposed, and we could create a REST message, et cetera. But when you look at how little you actually have to do to make it work in this case, it's kind of amazing. That webhook URL is literally the only thing you need for that integration into that, as opposed to figuring out the payload and creating creating a formatted JSON and posting it, et cetera. That's all it takes.
Yeah. So we have the webhook URL with us, and I passed the incident details. Now I'm going to pass the username. So we can pass the created by. Okay, all right. So we have the webhook URL, and I'm passing the incident trigger. And on top of it, I'm also passing the username. So I'll go ahead and click on done. There are additional fields that probably you can reference in the documentation. And then we'll have the another action. So basically this time what we'll do is we'll post the details, or we'll create this incident on other instance. So I'm going to select one of the action from e-bonding. And again, this action is available to you when you have the IntegrationHub plugin. So what I'll do is I'll click the create remote incident. So basically what this action will do is it will create a record on the external instance, and it will fetch the incident number from the target instance, and it will update on the correlation ID of your source instance. I'll go ahead and drag the incident record and click on done. So for this piece of action, we have to also configure the external system details. So I'll step back and go to my instance, and we'll configure those details. So we can configure those details in the connection and credential alias module. So I'll click on the new button to configure the connection and new instance. Click on new, and we'll select the basic auth credentials. For now, I'll pass the admin name and admin password, but in the real-time integration, probably you may want to have the integration specific user created and give the limited system of roles instead of exposing the complete admin roles. On submit.
Dave, did you want to talk about that is a fairly new feature in Kingston with the credential aliases?
Right. One of the things that exists to do is basically to solve that problem of where you've got throughout your flow, where you've got test systems, you've got QA systems and acceptance tests, and et cetera. One of the things that this does is it basically abstracts that away from you. So it gives you the ability basically to move that configuration to data, so that it's not unlike the strategy of, say, putting things in system properties, but it does it in a very kind of specific, purpose-built manner, specifically for the credentials and for these connection information to other systems. So it's actually a very nice feature.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think we are done with the creation of most of the actions. So what I'll do is the next step is to save this. And once we save it, probably what we can do is we need to ensure that this flow is working fine. I can go ahead and click on test button. And this is one of the awesome feature I like about the Flow Designer. So you'll see this test is integrated in the same UI. So I think it makes the life of your developer easy. Instead of going back and forth to test this flow, I can be on the same UI and I can pretty much test it. So for now, I'm gonna grab one of the record and I'll click on run test. So on the backend, what it's gonna do is it will automatically fulfill the trigger condition and it will execute all the set of actions. So click on this link. Oops, so it says create operation on table is denied. Okay, so it looks like there is some cross-specific access denied from this ITSM spoke. We can quickly fix it. Probably we need to go to cross-scope module.
Yeah, and while Pradeep is working on that, so he showed the actions that are available. So out of the box, on your baseline instance, there are something like 60. We kind of saw a cross section of them. as he was kind of showing what was available. Those are the ones that are provided, and I believe, time permitting, we're actually going to try to have enough time at the end to show creating a simple action ourselves. So the 60 are the ones that are provided day one. You have the ability to add your own logic in here, so you could create your own integration. You could add your own action. So if you have a system that you need an integration to, and you may want, your development team may want to provide the action so that non-developers can actually set up the flows and do this. So it provides kind of an interesting structure in some ways to maybe even do a little bit of redefinition around the roles of what the various teams do, right? Yeah. So that the dev team may not be the ones responsible for the flow. They may be responsible for, say, the atomic units inside the flow, and then somebody else is tasked with creating the flows and maintaining the flows.
The key there is, if you're going to be making new actions that deal with integrations, you're going to need IntegrationHub.
Correct. Yes.
Otherwise, you are constrained by license and product. That Flow Designer will, like you said before, allow you to do all the stuff that's on platform, and you can create your own on-platform actions. That's just fine.
Absolutely. Yes.
Dave, did you notice this error before?
I have not seen that error. No. So that the error, I think, was that from ITSM to global, or was it vice versa? I didn't.
Yes, it says that create operation on the incident task was denied. Probably, I think it's cross spoke access. So let me go ahead and check it again.
An incident task has created.
Yeah, so probably we are creating incident task, and we have table create allowed.
Is ITSM? Okay.
Let me try it one more time. Oops.
Yeah, and so one of the other things, while Pradeep is working with that, one of the other things, so he showed briefly the like the if and the looping logic. One of the things to be aware of in the looping logic, and this is something that again, a lot of times when I approach these new releases, I just start playing with things without necessarily knowing exactly what they're going to do. Because partly I want to just see the experience of a new user that just goes in and starts naively working with it. And so when you do that for each, as of Kingston, the one thing that you can do with that is act on a list of records. So one of the things I tried to do, well, like my naive first attempt at that, is I took a watch list and to see if I was able to loop over the watch list, and in that like particular thing, actually what you would do is just get one reference to the watch list, and you wouldn't get every single like individual entry of the watch list. So it's really acting on like lists of records. So if you've got either a step where you're doing a query and that query returns a list of record, that would be a thing that would be available for you to loop on.
So I'll just quickly compare it with one of the application scope. So I'll open this record. And we have global glide record insert. It's scriptable.
And we can actually, Pradeep, we can probably move on from this because it's not so super cogent that we do this one specific task. So we can kind of show some of the other actions of that if
yeah, probably I'll take a step back. For some reason, I don't know why it's not working. So probably I'll take a step back, and I'll delete this action, and we'll have the another action in place.
And did you mention when you click the test that it's skipping over the trigger?
Yeah, it's actually going. It's basically short-circuiting the trigger mechanism, and the trigger is firing with that record that you selected, whether or not it would have actually triggered. Like if you have a condition on there, I believe it's going to actually, correct me on that if I'm wrong, Pradeep. Will it, if you pick a record that has a condition that wouldn't match the trigger, will it trigger or not trigger?
It will still trigger.
It will still trigger no matter what.
Yes.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Yes. Because I was doing this where I said the trigger had a condition where the state changes to approval. And when I hit test, it took whatever record I said, approval or not, and it ran it.
Right. Okay.
thing that we got in a discussion with a week or two ago about the test is it's not the same as the test on ATF. It does not roll back those changes. So if you're affecting records, those changes are affected, just like if you would have run a scheduled job or a scripting, a UI action or a business rule on those records in dev. This is the same kind of thing. It's like, go test this out. And it's making changes to so you can follow those actions through. There's no rollback capability to Flow Designer.
Okay, so what I have done is like I've removed the create incident task, which was shipped out of box. For some reason, like we are seeing the error. So I have selected create task and I'm passing the incident task table details, and we'll go ahead and try it one more time. And hopefully this should work now. All right, so looks like to be working. So right now you can see this is an flow execution details. So from here I can view the state of each of the action and the start time and with the runtime values. And I believe that we have the system quota rules inbuilt, which would block if it is more than 1 minute. So and this runtime is probably helpful for you if you want to debug or if you want to look at the performance of each of the action. So I can click on each of the action and you'll see the configuration details with input and output values. And if there are any log information, you can see the log information from the same screen.
This is really handy, having done this a few times.
Yeah. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll go ahead and fulfill this wait for condition. So currently this is waiting on this action. Unless we have this state as resolved, it will not move to the next action. So I'll go ahead and fulfill this condition. Probably we can open the record from this tab and I'll go to this incident and I'll set the state to resolve. Okay, I'll go back to the tab and I'll try to reload it. Okay, so we had the wait for condition fulfilled and it looks like we got the incident posted in our Slack channel. So I'll go ahead and open our Slack channel. So let me make sure I'm in the right channel.
And I think you have a, is that the same one in that other tab? Oh, there it is right there.
There it is.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yep. Yeah, so we can see the incident details posted in our Slack channel. And I think next of the action was create remote incident. So we'll go ahead and look in one of the instance where the incident should be posted.
Yeah, and these like these various integrations, as I was saying before, they're not necessarily bringing net new functionality. I mean, these things existed, but when you look at the amount of time that it took to do this integration versus pre Flow Designer, pre IntegrationHub, there's no comparison. It takes about 1 minute to do this, which I defy anybody to do that old style that fast.
Yeah, so looks like we got our incident created on this instance. So this is pretty much of the flow that we have covered. So it looks like it's working fine. So what we'll do is the next step is to go back to our own flow and we'll go ahead and click on activate. So what this is gonna do is it will change the status to published, and then probably we can create one more incident and we can make sure that it is working fine. So I'll go ahead and click on activate. So the moment you click on activate, it's gonna trigger for each and every incident that's gonna create beyond this creation of the trigger. So I'll click on OK. And I'll go back to this instance and I'll create one incident.
And it's worth noting, like while you're typing, Pradeep, that activation and deactivation step. So if you go in and you make any change to it, it's very much like when you're in the editing phase of a workflow. which is you've got the published, activated version of the flow. At this moment, like right now, that flow is sitting there waiting for events to fire it. The creation or updating of an incident. And then there's a life cycle, right? Because it's got that wait for condition. So you could conceivably have some number of executions sitting there paused, waiting for that. Then you make an edit to the logic. At that point, like everybody who has that active context is not going to get your new logic. It's the same kind of process as the workflow, right?
Yeah.
It'll be going forward at that point when you activate the newly updated, newly edited flow designer. That is, then active for new events at that point.
Yeah, because you could easily, if you don't do it like that, then you could easily end up with a problem where something, maybe you were doing a cutover to a new process and your old ones all of a sudden get the new process. That could be a problem.
It was working on a step that's now gone.
Yeah.
Well,
if you removed that wait for if it didn't do that and you remove that wait for a condition, what happens to all those guys who are waiting for the condition?
Right.
And I'll say this also for the old workflow. One thing that bugged me is when you check one out and you go, I don't need this version. The action was to delete it, and it's like, okay, it just takes you a moment to think, what am I deleting? The entire workflow, or just the context? Even though I was seasoned with the workflows, it always make me think, wait a minute, what am I deleting?
Yeah, so we had our incident created, and probably I went to the flow designer module again, and you can see that I can view all the existing flow execution from this tab. So currently I have created one of the incident and we'll go to the flow designer execution. From here I can open and I can view at which action it is currently waiting. So you can see that it got triggered and we had the email fired, and I can view all the configuration detail from this execution tab. And we got our incident task created. So if I go to the runtime value, I can view the incident task number that got created with this.
Nice.
And one of the things I really like about that is that when you click that from the the list of contexts, you've got the same UI as the test, right? This is showing you exactly the same thing in exactly the same way with the same information, which is, I think, just a nice usability feature.
Yeah.
And so, I'm gonna echo what I think Chuck and Dave brought up. Was I love seeing all that data that you're working with right there on the screen. It makes it so much easier.
So I had the state as resolved. So probably this condition should get fulfilled and it should move to the next action. All right. So let's go ahead and check our Slack channel again. And yes, we can see that the incident got created. So it looks like it's working fine.
Fantastic. I love to see it.
I like the I like the fact that these are tighter components than workflow as well. You're making a very purpose-specific flow in Flow Designer to say, when this trigger happens, I want you to do these 4 or 5 steps, or maybe it's more, maybe it's less. And then you could have another one. So much like business rules, where I need a trigger for A and a trigger for B and then a trigger for C, you would have potentially multiple flows on any given record for certain conditions to trigger those and run them down another path. You could even have the actions of one flow trigger another flow because you've updated the record and says, hey, now I've changed state that kicks off this other flow. So it's a very, I don't know, like a block structure that you could put together very easily, which makes it easier to debug as well.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that comes from, these are basically like lighter weight and less expensive to create and to edit them. So that kind of is as natural, it kind of naturally decomposes that monolith, right?
Yeah, don't think you have to take your change workflow that has 150 activities on it and convert it into one monolithic flow that has 150 or more actions on it. They're not one for one.
And also worth noting that because of that, so Pradeep was using that post-incident details. There's also like a generalized action. There's the 3 specific ones: the problem, incident change, that are kind of from that that ITSM view that knows what's in those records and kind of knows what's meaningful for them. There's also a general purpose one where you can build everything about that communication yourself.
Neat. We've got about 10 minutes. You think you can
Yep.
walk us
So-
through what it takes to make a new action?
I
Yes,
certainly would like to see that.
Yeah, we can definitely walk through the new action. I just want to cover one more thing before we move ahead with the new action.
Mhm.
So on this flow execution detail, probably if you want to cancel the flow, you can come back and click on this button. What this gonna do is it will cancel this complete execution for this flow. So think of it in the like a workflow. So we get a use case where we probably need to cancel the execution of complete workflow for a record. So if you need it for the flow designer, probably you can do it from this execution view. All right, so let's go ahead and create the new action. So to create a new action, I'm going to click on this button and I can select this new action drop-down value, and we'll call this as action demo. And we'll select the application scope to demo now. So probably make sure that we are doing in our own scope. And the next field is accessible from. So we have two values here. One is application scope or this application scope only. So what does this do is if I select it as this application scope, it is gonna limit other application from having access to this custom action. So by default, the value is all application scope. So I'll leave it to now. And we have the protection policy. I'll leave it to none. Coming back to inflow annotation, I can give the inline documentation. So if I have any text here, probably what it's gonna do is on the flow designer view, when you select an action, on the next right-hand side, you will see all the documentation that what I'll type in here. So for today's example, what we'll do is we'll create a custom action to copy an attachment from incident to problem table.
Which sometimes people want to do.
And I'll go ahead and click on submit. So action is basically made up of inputs, steps, and outputs. So for in this specific use case, the input would be an incident table. And what we'll do is the next step would be to create an action. And by default, I think we have 13 steps shipped as part of our platform. And if you notice on the utilities section, you see the REST utility. I think probably this is only available if you have the IntegrationHub plugin. And
Yeah,
Dave
as
probably
is
can
script.
confirm.
It says it both on the bottom. It says both script and REST are only available with IntegrationHub.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll go back and quickly create an input, and I'll give it the incident, and we'll select it reference to incident table. And then next, then we'll move with the step action, and I'll select the script. So I'll copy the attachment API.
Might be the last time you see the wiki in this show.
I forget the exact day, but
Whatever.
the days are very numbered at this point.
10th, wasn't it? Really?
I think it's 10th.
We'll
Okay,
have to
so
have a
the
wiki party.
this is the attachment API. Probably I'm passing the incident, and we need to pass the incident sysID. And the next parameter is problem, which is a table name. And then we need to pass the problem sysID. So here we need to pass the input as incident sysID and the problem sysID. So what I'll do is I'll create a variable in the script step so that we can fetch the input parameters and pass in our script section. So I'll give the parameter as incident underscore sysID. And I'll expand this and I'll drop the incident sysID from the data bus. I'll create one more variable.
Yeah, I'm curious to see where you're going to pull this from.
Yeah, so if you're familiar with the, I just forgot the terminology. It's called dot walking. So what I can do is I can drill down to the problem.
Was it a problem? Yeah.
Yes, and I can drill down and I can fetch the sysID from this problem field.
We might need to change that term from dot walking to arrow walking because now we're using arrows.
Yeah. So what we are doing is we are getting the incident sysID and we're storing it in this variable. And then we are drilling from the problem field and fetching the sysID of the problem. And I'm storing it in the problem underscore sysID variable. So the next step is I'm going to pass the parameters to this API. So I'll remove this hard-coded value. And it's worth noting that I can pass the inputs parameter by prefix inputs dot the variable name. And I'll remove this hard-coded value and I'll pass problem sysID. Okay, so probably we are done with this. What I'll do is basically this returns the output in the Java array. So what we're going to do is we'll convert it from the object and store it in the JavaScript array. So let me store it in one of the variables.
And just to note, so before we leave the action UI, that outputs at the bottom, anything that you put in that outputs, that's going to be what it makes it available to those data pills for subsequent steps. So like in your custom action, if there was a thing you wanted, like say you wanted to return the problem sysID or something, or let's say the attachment sysID of, you could do that by adding that to the outputs, and then that would be something that would be draggable and droppable in future steps. You know, whatever is meaningful for that.
Yeah, some of this I can see echoes from some of the direction the workflow was going in when you had custom activities. You could have there's a data bus, and you could have outputs. Of course, you could define them, and that's I can see where this is related to all that. For what it's worth.
So I'm just making this J2JS script include to all application scope because we may see an error. So I'll change this, and I think
be careful when you do that. That was in the global scope.
Yeah, so I'm prefixing with the global, and I think, Chuck, that's a good point, because if you're building an application for store, this is something that would not get captured in your own specific scoped application.
Right.
So you may want to capture it in your own scope with some of the own methods. But for now, today's demo, I'll just change it to all application scope, and I'm calling this with the prefix global. And the other thing to be noted here is that I can store or I can pass the output variables if I have the outputs as in prefix. So I was doing a demo, and I think I was playing around with the flow designer, and it took some time for me to figure it out that I need to prefix output as while passing the output variable. So I'll store this in the output variable, and we'll have this as string. And to look at interesting, we'll have the log statement. And the next step is to store the output. So probably this is useful because if I do not have this as an output, while I'm using this action in my flow designer, I would not be able to pass the output of this attachment sysID as an input to another action if I want. So I'll quickly create an output variable here.
Didn't you already have it as an output in the previous step?
Yeah, but he said it's part of this activity. Unless you specifically put it in the outputs, it won't be available to the rest of the flow.
Yeah, it's the difference between the output of a step and the output of the action as a whole.
Gotcha.
See, I'm seeing this as kind of like a flow in itself. You know, there's your steps on the left-hand side, and
it is kind of fractal in the way and an action does look a lot like a flow.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and we'll test this action. I'll go to the flow designer demo, and I'll go ahead and act this custom action. So we have the demo now. Okay, so I can pass the incident details from this section trigger, and I'll go and click on done. So basically, before we test it, what I'll do is I'll make sure that we have an incident which is associated with one of the problem.
Getting the right demo data is always half the challenge.
And finding the specific record. Yes. One of the tricky aspects.
I'll attach one of the attachment. Okay, so I'll select the incident what we have just created with the attachment. I'll click on run test.
Got to get it past your wait for condition too.
Yeah.
All right, and we are at the top of the hour, so let's, with any luck, we'll get to the big finish right here. We'll have the finale and the thank you, good night moment.
Do we
Mic
have
drop.
any wrapping, any wrap up summary slide or anything, Dave? We do have this
yeah.
for closing.
Yeah, we'll pop back to that for just a second when we're done here. No, not quite the mic drop.
Oh no.
More like you dropped it on your toe.
Okay, I think for time being, I'll not take it further. So probably there looks to be some error, but probably I think we have pretty much covered the action, and we have seen like how to pass an input and output parameters, and we have seen like how to publish an action. So Dave, back to you.
All right, thank you very much, Pradeep. I think while we were on there, I think I thought of the term for your dot walking alternative, which I think is going to be data pill pushing.
I was thought you were going to go with pointers or something, but okay.
All right, so thank you very much. So let us get to our little bit of wrap up there. And so docs.servicenow.com, there is a lot of Flow Designer information up there. We've kind of talked about the end of the wiki era. So that's where you're going to need to look for that going forward. ServiceNow community, developer ServiceNow, and down there at the bottom, bit.ly, bit.ly, ServiceNow-TechNow. That is the index to all of these TechNow shows. And if you just Google on Live Coding Happy Hour, as we said, we've got a couple of these Flow Designer shows. We've done 2 of them so far, and like that first one is like the most rapid acceleration of views we've ever seen in anywhere in our program. So fun, interesting stuff. So with that, let us go on to our very last one. Get in touch. Follow us on the community. TechNow at ServiceNow.com, ServiceNow Now Community, and the ServiceNow Community YouTube channel. All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Let me turn off the screen share. And with that, thanks everybody for your time. Thank you, Pradeep, for your demo.
Wonderful.
Fascinating stuff. I love this so much. This is really, like I said, Flow Designer is really exciting. I mean, it's hard to oversell like how game-changing it is. It's one of those things that I think is so mind-blowing that's going to take us a little while to actually see how it's going to work in organizations, because you can see the potential for a lot of transformation of how people do business, even who does the business, right? Who, like, will we see like the dream realized where it's like business process owners are the ones who do a lot of the flows? I'm just so curious for like the next 6 months of figuring. By the time we get to knowledge, I think we'll have some really interesting conversations with customers, and I cannot wait.
Oh yeah, there'll be a lot of custom activities floating around. It'll be fantastic.
I can't wait to see what happens on Share and the store, and this is going to be a really exciting next year, and I just am delighted to be a part of it.
I'm doing the same thing at home with a couple of integrations, saying, maybe I should build these in Flow Designer. Just thinking about.
Turn on my living room lights. Turn off my.
Exactly.
And that is one of those things we'll have to talk about, in coming months, which is one of the questions you always get when there's a feature like this is, does that mean I turn off my workflows? And it doesn't mean that day one, but you may, very much like it's very analogous to say CMS to Service Portal, which is you may not want to be investing a lot in workflows unless what you need to do just can't be done with the Flow Designer at this point. But you will have a lot of decisions to make going forward, kind of how it partitions, but it just really opens up the available possibilities to you, and it's exciting stuff. All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you everybody for watching, and with that, get your finger ready, Chuck, for the music.
I'm ready.
Oh, and as a housekeeping note, next show will be much sooner. I think what, week and a half.
14th.
14th.
See you then. Bye.
Bye.